Hello, everyone, and welcome to Alpha Talks. This is the third installment of a wider 5 conversations on Nordic fashion that are happening across Stockholm, Oslo, Reykjavik, Helsinki, and Copenhagen. The Nordic region has experienced a fashion boom. It has become more self-confident in terms of fashion designers and the culture surrounding fashion in the countries, both internally in our region, but also externally towards the world. Each of these talks focuses on the local framework, the fashion culture in the specific country, today Sweden, and its local institutions and people with innovative practices and critical mindsets. So, in 2011, the Swedish fashion wonder, det svenska modeundret, was announced by the press. This was a term that largely focused on the growth of Swedish fashion labels around the millennium. The wonder was then later cancelled when aspects of responsibility and new ways of producing came to the fore. Looking at Swedish fashion from an outsider's perspective, it seems the field consists of a multitude of offerings and strands. One of these major strands is represented by H&M and its conglomerate labels such as Monkey, Arket, Weekday, COS, you name it. The other strand is a strand that emerged in the late 90s, where we saw an emergence of designers that have worked more unconventionally and independently. One of these designers is, of course, Ann-Sofie Back. But we also have other names to add to that list, including Sandra Backlund, Patrick Söderström, Martin Bergström, to name some of them. Of newer date of more independent labels, we have Hodakova, Rave Review, Beate Karlsson, and Febben, just to name some. In recent years, an organization like the Swedish Fashion Council has been instrumental in promoting this strand of talents through talent support. Between these extreme poles, if you want, the very conglomerate strand and the independent strand, we of course have other labels, including premium labels like Totem and Acne, Tiger of Sweden, what have you, Filippa K, Lindeberg. Fashion schools are instrumental to the future of Swedish fashion, but so is the wider environment of production and consumption and the media. And what better occasion to have this talk coinciding with Ann-Sofie's exhibition. I can't recall doing a talk in a more dramatic and fitting setting. Culture, of course, is diverse. It's made up of different voices and generations. So in this talk, I use Swedish fashion quite freely to refer to fashion that is created in Sweden, regardless of nationality and cultural background, and by Swedes who live abroad. I'm very pleased to have 3 very fine panelists with me today to help me unpack the topic. The fashion designer Ann-Sofie Back is known for her subversive and thought-provoking fashion, often exploring stereotypes of beauty, taste, femininity, social phenomenon, shame, and status. Back is a Central St. Martin's graduate, and she has shown at London and Paris Fashion Weeks. She's been sold in stores worldwide and has been included in prominent museums and galleries around the world. Back's archive has been kept intact since she started designing in 1998, and her entire body of work is on show in the current exhibition Go As You Please, Ann-Sofie Back, 1998 to 2018. In the middle, we have Maria Ben Saad, who is a fashion writer, editor, curator, and educator. Maria has been instrumental to developing Swedish fashion since the 1990s. As fashion editor at Bibel magazine and contributions to a film documentary about fashion designer Ann-Sofie Back, and the fashion television series Velvet, and the touring exhibition Swedish Fashion Exploring a New Identity. Maria currently holds a position as senior lecturer in BA Fashion History Theory and Context at Beckmans College of Design, and she has recently published the digital anthology Critical Fashion Project, Reflections in Theory and Practice. Last but definitely not least, we have Nicole Walker, a multidisciplinary artist, curator and stylist, as well as the co-founder of the fashion and art platform Amaze. Central to Walker's practice is her use of sculpture and montage, which informs her approach across various disciplines, whether styling, creating art, or curating exhibitions. Through Walker's practice, she bridges fashion and art and crosses traditional boundaries. As a curator, Walker creates exhibitions that provoke discourse and challenge normative perceptions within contemporary art and fashion. And Nicole has co-curated and co-styled the exhibition with Ann-Sofie back. Right, enough for me. I always kick these conversations off with the same question. And so I would like to ask you all what 3 words you associate with Swedish fashion. Do you want to go first?
You want me to start? Yeah, it was just the first 3 words that I was thinking, and it was homogeneous and beige and anxious.
Anxious.
Anxious, yeah.
Okay. Mm. Do you want to follow?
I will try not to overthink this, but I would say pragmatic, informed or conscious, and the third word would be polished.
Polished.
Mm.
I must have missed this question in the email.
Okay.
I have no idea. I was going to say anxious, but then she took it, so now I don't know. I can't. I'd say there are 2, like you mentioned when you introduced the topics, that there's Philippa K on the one end, and then there are people like me or Sandra Backlund back then, for example. So it coexists in a market that is too small to have all those. Somehow that's not one word, but
it's a good one. Just writing here. Okay. Maria, you've been involved in Swedish fashion for over 20 years. You've seen the ebb and flow of Swedish fashion. And I'm curious as to how you witnessed fashion change in the 1990s when you started your career.
Yeah. Well, the most important change to me personally, I think, was the appearance of conceptual fashion, or fashion about fashion, the definition of fashion, on an international level at that point. Fashion designers and other creatives within the fashion system started to challenge norms within fashion, such as standards of beauty, for example, glamour, and the fashion world also started to open up, I think, to issues outside fashion, such as migration, in the case of Essential Iron, ethnical cleansing in the case of Alexander McQueen, or animal rights, like in the case of PETA, and issues that traditionally was not part of the fashion scene. And in Sweden, this shift wasn't really visible in the same way, maybe, as in London, for example. But there was definitely a sense that Swedish fashion was moving away from its tradition and focus on function, or populism, or fast fashion, and I think a modernist aesthetic, clean aesthetics. So that was the change at the time that I really took interest in.
So this exhibition that you were involved or curated, Swedish fashion exploring a new identity, what did this new identity entail, and how did it depart from the old one? Was it the old one being pragmatic, functionalist, or is there more to it than that?
Yeah, I think at fashion at the time of the exhibition, that was in 2007, was very much associated with fast fashion, and H&M, and also trendy streetwear like Acne jeans and Cheap Monday, so on, and also aesthetically some kind of tasteful minimalism, And the new identity was more about personal expression and creative freedom. It was like a clear departure from the more stereotypical image of Swedish fashion. And with the exhibition, I wanted to put that forward, this a fashion scene that was more into personal creativity and creative freedom that was developing among young designers, fashion talents at the time.
So approximately at the time you did your exhibition, you moved back to, Ann-Sofie, you moved back from London. After 13 years in London, you moved back to Sweden. And how would you describe the culture around fashion you've moved back to after 13 years in one of the hubs of fashion?
I mean, there were like a fashion week back then, and there were lots of small brands showing. I think it was sponsored at the time by Mercedes-Benz, and yeah, it was quite a lot happening, even though again, it's like it's high and low at the same time because it's such a small country. So it's a bit confusing if you come from another country and you're a journalist and look at it, because how are you going to compare a tiny brand with Philippe Paquet and it's the same fashion week? It's like everyone's invited, which is also fun, but yeah.
How did you see your label in that context at the time?
I'm not sure. That I don't know, that I was going to try and make the best of it. I wanted to live in Sweden, and I had to change how we worked. Before, we used to do all the sample collection in the studio with machinists and with the pattern cutters, but that was completely impossible in Sweden because it's so expensive, and maybe Stockholm doesn't hold the knowledge that was needed for, since my collections is everything from like a bridal dress to swimwear to jeans, it's hard to find people with the right knowledge here, and that was really sad. And then you, as a designer, you lose a lot of the control if everything is done somewhere else. And quality also goes down, I would say, as a result.
Now there's been a lot of media attention on you because of this wonderful exhibition, and in several of the interviews that explain how you work and perhaps why you work, you share that growing up in a non-fashion conscious family in Stenhamra made you aware of the awkwardness and cringeworthy elements of fashion as a marker of social and cultural status. So shame and not fitting in run through your work, I'd say, as a big theme. Can you talk us through how you're using these, how are you using shame as a driver in your work?
For me, fashion and shame are linked, because my parents were they were aesthetically uninterested and not knowledgeable, and so I had to, and then I moved to Stenhamra, which is a very normal suburb outside of Stockholm, and I had to sort of try and fit in there. I went to Waldorf school, and that was much more multicultural kind of atmosphere. But in Stenhamra, I changed schools. It was very much more conformistic, and I used fashion as a way to fit in and be better than the other people in Stenhamra, or in my mind, better. So I worked extra in a sausage stand to be able to buy Gaultier clothes. So I used fashion as a masquerade and, basically lie about who I was. So, and I don't think I realized from the beginning that this was my unique viewpoint. That came sort of later, maybe when I started working with Anders Edström and things like that, and we had the same kind of shame around the fashion.
So that's interesting. The same kind of shame you share with another Swede that's also gone abroad. Do you think there's even a Swedish cultural context to understanding this concept of shame? Obviously, it's a universal theme, but you found someone that shared your specific understanding of shame in Anders, right?
Yeah. I mean, we have jantelagen, as you all know, but I think that...
Tall poppy syndrome.
Sorry?
It's called tall poppy syndrome. Don't believe that you can grow higher than the others. Yeah.
But that's a different thing, I think. So for me, shame was my personal unique viewpoint on fashion that no one else was talking about or has been talking about, because it's basically commercial suicide, because who wants to be aware of shame? Everyone just wants to forget about it and become perfect. And so.
Nicole, as a multidisciplinary artist, you've been involved in cultivating a new scene at the crossroads of art and fashion here in Stockholm, not least through the creative platform Amaze. And I'm also curious to hearing how you experienced fashion in Stockholm prior to founding Amaze in 2015, which is almost 10 years ago.
Prior to as Ann-Sofie mentioned, there was then a fashion week, which sort of there was still some sort of room for everyone or a lot of people who work within the fashion industry in Sweden, primarily Stockholm, to sort of coexist within this fashion week. But I always found it very limiting, and also I was constantly visiting other fashion weeks in other cities and got heavily inspired by the fact that there were scenes in New York where there were a lot of designers who would show off schedule, but they would get as much press and as much people coming to their presentations and all of that. And it was just like this vibrating scene in like New York or in London. And then I was always wondering, because I did feel that there was a lot of creative people in Stockholm that didn't necessarily show on the actual fashion schedule, even though it's such a small space. Or so I still felt that there was like a missing space for a lot of not necessarily younger. Also, I sort of hate this grouping to say that it was like the young designers, not necessarily, because I worked with designers that were like 50 plus, and I was just like a smaller, not as established sort of designers and artists that were creating things. And I really felt like a personal need to create some sort of space for this. As I was living in this city, and I really like had a need for another sort of outlet or space. And also I was very, very frustrated of this like cringy Mercedes-Benz front row, or they would have obviously these very like these tents, and there would be like this built platform for the catwalk, and I just felt that it was such a stagnated, boring concept of how to present fashion. And so this was also highly irritating to me, and I wanted to do it some other way. Yeah, and that's why I founded Amaze, to sort of have no rules or no like.
What year was that?
There was
2015.
2015, yeah.
Oh, so I was too late.
But I wonder, how has that changed
You were
now?
too late now.
Do you think that the designers and artists and people with alternative practices now have a seat at the table here? Do you think that there's a platform for that kind of outlet now here in Stockholm?
If like right now, I personally don't feel that there's any platform at all, or like any sort of context where everybody can gather. I mean, there's no fashion week. There's also no. I mean, there's not a lot of even magazines anymore that would like bring people together for, I don't know, certain events. Or I feel it's a very like dried out moment in time somehow. I don't know. I feel like or at least I think because I also am very much involved with like the art scene and art community in Stockholm as well. And there I feel that it's like small new galleries opening, and it's a lot of happening where like people are taking like very much initiatives with like having galleries in their house or just like trying different things. And that feels active and that feels really interesting. And then when you look at fashion in comparison to that, I feel like the fashion scene is very like, of course, a lot of Swedish designers are showing abroad and are also like living abroad and all of that, and sort of create their scene in that sense. And of course, it's still a lot of people active within the fashion industry in Stockholm, but there's no mutual space or anything like that. So yeah.
Let's return to Fashion Week a bit later. I'm curious as to how you embarked on the journey with Ann-Sofie to curate and co-curate and co-style the exhibition, because it seems as if there's a shared methodology between how you work and how Ann-Sofie work. And instead of this celebratory retrospective exhibition, you have messed things up and mixed the archive of Ann-Sofie in a presenting it in a non-chronological way across seasons and years. Can you talk us through how you embarked on styling this vast archive with Ann-Sofie?
I mean, Ann-Sofie approached me a couple of years ago, telling me that she was going to do this exhibition, and I was just so happy that she reached out to me because we had been working with her archive before together when she was a part of the exhibition at Artipelag, and already then it was such a. I had only ever been able to go through the boxes when I was requesting something for a magazine or something like that, and I could go a few times I got to dig through a few of the boxes. But I mean, it's a pure pleasure for me. I mean, I was 14 and I've in a store in Gothenburg, and I found Ann-Sofie's clothes, and for me it was like the shit. It was like finding what I wanted fashion to be like. So for me, it's like to be able to see every garment, to go through every collection is a complete dream and inspiration for me as a creative person. And also the fact that we started talking about it, and then she early on mentioned that she didn't want to do it maybe traditional, like to keep all the looks the way they were, or the collections even the way they were, which was even more of a like dream to me, obviously, because as a stylist then there's no restrictions, right? And it felt like we could just create so many new characters and visions and looks and everything. And so what was the question though?
Yeah, you answered it. Yeah, how the process of styling was. I cannot help but, sort of notice that Swedish museums and art institutions, including Moderna, Liljevalchs, Valdemarsudde, just to name some, have integrated fashion into their programming over the past 20 years. And in Denmark, where I'm from, except for a few institutions, including Copenhagen Contemporary, art museums have been more reluctant to including fashion, and because of its seemingly lower cultural and artistic status. So in comparison, Swedish cultural institutions seem more unafraid or perhaps understanding of the cultural value of fashion. And Maria, why do you think, as someone that's been around and involved in fashion in Sweden since the 90s, why do you think Swedish art institutions are more inclined to including fashion into their programming when compared to their more reluctant Nordic neighbors?
Yeah, I can't really answer for the Nordic neighbors, but I think that one possible reason for the modern art museum in Stockholm to stage the exhibition Fascination in 24, for example, was their interest in postmodernism, and within postmodernism, the hierarchy between art and fashion is blurred, and also the notion of art is expanded, and I think fashion fitted in, and it opened up for an ambiguous territory to explore for both fashion creators, fashion designers, and also artists. So perhaps the postmodern culture is more rooted in Swedish art institutions than in the other Nordic countries. But that is just my guess. Mm-hmm.
Okay, but Ann-Sofie, having been involved in multiple exhibitions, and this is your big, not retrospective, but recontextualized exhibition, what does the exhibition format offer in terms of communicating your work and point of view?
I think, I mean, I've worked quite conceptually with the fashion shows as well. But of course, it's even more freedom when it's you're doing it for a longer period and you have, like us, 2.5 months working physically with the exhibition. And it's kind of, what was the question?
I'm asking, what does the exhibition format offer to you? What can you say with the exhibition that you can't necessarily convey in a show or in another format?
I'm not sure. I think the most important thing is that when you have a fashion show and you worked really hard and it's over with 30 looks, 6-7 minutes, and everyone runs away and you have no idea what happened and you're very alone and sad. Yeah. Here it's been a longer period and it's sort of different types of magazines and people can sort of interact with it, whereas at the fashion show it's just the journalists, but here anyone who's interested in art and maybe just walks up the stairs can see it. So I think that's what it is for me.
Is there something specific you want to communicate with this exhibition?
No. I think it's so obvious. I don't know how to even say it. I don't know. Yes, there's one thing. How that I think when I look at the exhibition now, after a couple of weeks after the opening, it's even more clear to me how relevant a code I did 2004 is today, and how it really feels like these garments could have been designed 6 months ago. And I had an inkling that was the case, but it's sort of, I think it's clear.
Well, that must be a nice feeling.
It's super nice.
Yeah. Obviously, we can't talk about Swedish fashion without touching on H&M, this giant that was established in 1947. You can say if IKEA looks after our homes, H&M looks after how we dress. H&M provides the bread and butter to many creatives living in Sweden. And with this sort of being such a wonderful place that can create jobs, I wonder if it can become too comfortable and perhaps stopping even young designers from launching their own label. Everyone? This is just my theory that I'd like to test with you guys.
I mean, for me, it's completely true. That's a fact. I would say I mean, the recruiters from H&M go to the fashion schools, or they reach out to students that are already in or are still in school, right? And this has happened a lot of times, and offering them a very good salary and a safety. And I mean, it's if you have a full-time job at H&M, you can have a good life, and you can have an apartment, and you can do all of that that you need to have in Stockholm to even be able to exist here, right? And no, I mean, H&M just is a very big reason that also photographers or stylists are not doing editorials or not doing other things because they're busy working with H&M and getting paid by H&M for doing their things. So there's a safety there, and it's obviously, I think, very limiting for what else can coexist with that.
Maria, from a Beckman's perspective, is there a great intake of graduates at the H&M Group?
Yeah, I would say that in a group, usually there are 12 students in a group at Beckmans. 3 to 5 students would be recruited by H&M or go on working for H&M and or the H&M group with the different brands like Weekday and Arket and other stores, for example. But there will also be students who will choose like middle-sized Swedish brands like Rodebjer or Deadwood or Stand, for example, Totem. And there will also be a group that might look for work abroad or internships. At the moment, there are students in a designer position from Beckmans at Mugler in Paris and Loewe, MM6, and Balenciaga as well, and Diesel. So I think the groups are quite diverse at Beckmans. They come from different backgrounds with different ambitions, and not everyone wants to start their own label, for example. So we try to approach fashion design from both like professional and artistic perspective, so that students who leave Beckmans can actually enter the job market after the graduation or start their own business. But there is also an academic side to the education, that we only give bachelor degrees or offer a bachelor degree at Beckmans. So we want to prepare the students also for further studies or education. And there are some students that also will take a master's degree in other countries, for example, Central St. Martin's and or London College of Art. So an H&M, yeah, there are always a group of students, but not as many as you might imagine. So 3 to 5 each in each group.
I have Swedish family. I even speak the language, so I'm just pretending I don't know anything today. So I believe I have a qualified understanding of Swedish culture. One of the qualities I associate with Sweden is consensus culture, which is of course a thing that is shared across Scandinavia. But there's even an added element to this, in my opinion, when we look at fashion, particularly in Stockholm, and it's this gravitation towards coolness or a fear of not being cool. Some years ago, I watched this brilliant television series on how Sweden is the most modern country in the world and how it strives to be modern, even though it's bloody hard work, it's constant work to stay in the know and on top of things. And one of the things that I really like about your work, Ann-Sofie, is it seems that you're dismantling these values of being cool, or at least it's you're at odds with coolness.
Yeah.
And I wonder, does your work begin with critical thinking, or do you start with garment making and designing?
It's been very different seasons. The most clear example of working with like a concept or an idea before designing is Celebrity Obsession, which is autumn winter 2008, where there was this culture of magazines, gossip magazines in the UK, where they really hounded women and shot them in, like Kate Moss, Amy Winehouse, Lindsay Lohan, and they shot, put the camera here in the crotch, and then they pixeled it out, and it was this, and these are magazines made by women often, and so it's women's hate being sold back to women, and I had that problem, and I didn't know how to solve it. So it took maybe 2 years before I realized how to make it into clothes. So that's one example. Another year, I had absolutely no ideas at all, and so I'm like, okay, how does all other designers do? They get inspired by the Second World War army costumes, or I don't know, something ridiculous. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to pretend I'm another designer and I'm going to be inspired by nature. And that worked out. Yeah. Really good. So I have to sort of work my way around that. And another season, I thought, well, I really lack the spontaneity in the process. So we decided that no garment could take more than 2 minutes to drape, for example. So it's different ways in to be inspired.
So Helsinki, Stockholm, Oslo, Reykjavik all have their specific local fashion scenes and cultures that are upheld not just by designers like you, but also by professionals who are involved in image making, like you are, Nicole. How do you believe, we touched upon it before, how does Stockholm inform your work as a stylist? Would you say that there's a specific cultural context here around the work of fashion?
That is like how my work. I don't think I think it's interesting because I work with clients abroad, and they are, if I'm in Korea or in New York or something, they are fascinated by the fact that I'm a Scandinavian, that I'm a Swede, right? But because they have their approach to Scandinavia and to Sweden, but I also work with a lot of if I work with a global client, and then they also just group. They are like heavily inspired by Denmark, and then they just group it together, and they're like, yeah, but you're almost Danish, right? Or like, yeah, but I don't. For me personally, there's not a lot of. I'm very uninspired here. Like if I walk down the street, I never ever get inspired, because here everyone is so well dressed.
Oh, yeah.
And like so conscious, And like if you have the newest like pullover sweater from Arket, then you can count it on the people in the subway. You know, it's like a little bit of a mass psychosis. And this it doesn't inspire me. When I'm in Germany, I love it. People look. I was there yesterday, and it's amazing. People have no like thought of how they dress. I mean, or they do, but it looks so bad that it looks amazing. And it's like, yeah, I don't know. Being Swedish. I think it's a very comfortable, privileged place to be in the world, and it's very comfortable. But in terms of inspiration and how it affects my work, it's yeah, no, it does not.
Let's return to Fashion Week, which we just touched on before, because historically Fashion Week has been this meeting point for industry professionals across designers, stylists, makeup artists, photographers, press, and so on. And back when the Swedish fashion wonder was announced, Stockholm Fashion Week was still alive and kicking. And I know there are other initiatives taking place, but I wonder how this absence of a Stockholm Fashion Week affects the culture of fashion here. Any takers?
I no, because I'm not active anymore. I think it was there Fashion Week in 2018?
I don't know when it officially ended. Really,
I'm not really.
I don't know when exactly that was, but I mean, there's been initiatives for something with Swedish Fashion Council having these Fashion X and that thing, but that was also very. I don't think. I've been also always very against the idea that Fashion Week is only for like fashion press or something like that, and this has been the case, right? But I think it's also interesting. I was thinking about that the fact that Beckmans is now not even in the city, actually, like physically, it's at Lidingö, and that Borås Textilhögskola is also not even
in Gothenburg,
not even in the same.
Yeah.
And I think I think it would make a difference if it was like if Borås Textilhögskola would be here, for example. I think or at least like the then younger vibrating scene could have had another platform if it was actually something that was all happening in the same place.
I think also that even when we had the Stockholm Fashion Week was going on, the big brands like Acne weren't present, so they left the Stockholm Fashion Week before it was officially cancelled. And I asked myself why international journalists, fashion journalists, and the buyers should care about Stockholm. So I think maybe we need to rethink the whole system. And I know that the Swedish Fashion Council has been doing that. And I think there's still a lot of work to do on the subject. But I am not sure that a fashion week would solve the issues that we have. I think we need a lot more, much better infrastructure for new emerging talents. What Swedish Fashion Council is doing is really important, but I think we need to do more. And concerning business model, and also look at small scale production chains, rent of studios and retail spaces. So I think it's really complex. And I don't think a fashion week will kind of solve all those problems. It's very much about marketing.
We all know, at least people working in fashion, how incredibly difficult it is to sustain a business as an emerging designer. And so I'm wondering what kind of future lies ahead for the future of Swedish fashion brands here, the ones that graduate from the Swedish School of Textiles or Beckmans.
I think if there's the ambition to have your own label, and I think there's a different focus now, even with the 10 years ago when I had friends who were like designers here who were active with or actually living here, like a former employee of yours, for example. There would be no recognition of smaller emergent designers like when I was doing Amaze, for example. Like you could be a designer here, but like the press here or the media wouldn't like even acknowledge your existence. And I think it's very different now, because if you are like a emerging young designer, there's interest, there's press, there's a lot of people who are interesting. I think it's also because it's been quite dry. It's been quite like not a lot. I mean, there's always something, but it's like I feel now there's, because of also social media and all of that, it's like a way more focus and highlight on the fact that there's new talents happening and things like that. So I think there's actually like a bigger platform than even, or a bigger potential to have your brand, if you have that ambition to do that, than maybe 10 years ago. Yeah.
So, Ann-Sofie, this exhibition marks your swan song, your final farewell to fashion. What would be your word of advice to graduates fresh out of college?
I really don't think I can give advice, because I think my journey or my experiences are they're so personal. They're not generally applicable. I really, and advice, no, I don't want to give it.
You're such an icon.
To the students, would you encourage them to start their own label, or would you say go learn the ropes somewhere else first?
No, I have no idea. I don't know what the best way is. And I never worked for another designer. And I think if I would have worked for another designer, I would never have started a label. But on the other hand, starting out not knowing anything is not good either. So I really don't know.
Great. So on that note, Ann-Sofie, Maria, Nicole, thank you so much for sharing your insights and help me cast light on this topic, Swedish fashion.